Hey guys, and welcome back to the Yes Means Yes podcast. As always, my name is Faith Nomchef, and I work as the ARP Outreach and Counseling Coordinator, the Rape Counselors of East Alabama. We have a guest on today, Mallory Visser. She is actually a social worker with the Little Rock Police Department, so we're excited to talk to her and get some insight about her job and her role in the mental health and sexual violence field. I'm also going to let Madison introduce herself as well. She's a new part of this podcast, and we're very excited to have her.
Thank you, Faith, for the lovely introduction. My name is Madison Maggio. I am the Community Outreach Coordinator and Victim Advocate here at Rape Counselors of East Alabama, and I am very excited to be a part of this podcast.
Awesome.
It's me. My name is Mallory Visser. I am the social worker, founder social worker at the Little Rock Police Department.
Awesome. Okay, so Mallory, explain to the viewers out there, what is a police department social worker? What does that job entail?
So it looks different in every police department that has a social worker. So what the model that we kind of started it as is we started it as a co-responder model. So again, this looks different in every single city that has a social worker, but typically it's a social worker that's paired with a police officer. In some cities, it's actually paired with a police officer and a medical person. And we respond to cases that really don't need police response. So a lot of times it's, a disturbance where, a parent is calling about their adult child who isn't taking their medications and just needs some extra help. Really, the main goal of the program is to reduce police violence, reduce unnecessary incarceration, and to get people to the help that they actually need, so that they're not sitting in jail. So when I started the program, unfortunately we don't have enough officers. Right now have a full co-response team. So right now it's myself, and then I have a part-time social worker, and we get reports sent to us by officers of, hey, you need to check this out. This person needs some assistance. We get a lot of referrals from the community. Parents will call in, concerned neighbors will call in, and then we follow up with them. I like to think of this position as kind of a lifelong case management. So if someone's, in the hospital or in a shelter of some sort and they come out, that person goes away and there's no longer that case management. But regardless of really, if you're in jail, if you're in a hospital, shelter, whatever, we maintain that contact with the individual. So we can provide continuous services, that there's not that disruption.
So I met Mallory actually when I was at a conference in Arkansas, their coalition, the Arkansas Coalition Against Sexual Assault. Lovely conference, but I love just getting to speak to you about, what you do. And it's just something we don't really have in Alabama currently right now. And I think it's awesome that you were kind of like, okay, this is a service gap, I'm going to fill it. And correct me if I'm wrong, you wrote your own grants and decided that you were gonna, okay.
Yeah. So when I first started at the police department, I started in 2019, and I was working in victim services, doing what I had been doing: sexual violence, domestic violence, responding to any violent crimes in the city. Mm-hmm. And it kind of morphed into okay, you're the only social worker on staff, so you're going to be dealing with all the mental health stuff, dealing with homelessness, anyone with a disability. That's going to be you, because you actually know what you're doing. And it became apparent that we were serving, in my position, we were serving people that weren't necessarily victims, but just people who needed some extra assistance. And so I got in the grants department, and we talked, and it was something that, like I said, it's been successful in other cities. So it was really a model that we're looking at that could potentially be a big help in the city, and kind of take some of the burden off of the officers, as
Mhm.
well as reduce that recidivism. So the idea and what we have seen is that, if they're getting mental health help, they're less likely to be involved with law enforcement in the future. So they recognize that it's, at the end of the day, I'm getting paid less than, 5 officers responding.
Yeah.
So it costs less money for me to respond versus all the officers. So
Mhm.
we're saving money there. We're also reducing the amount of 911 calls. And we're reducing the amount of people that we're sending to jail, mostly for what we call lifestyle crimes. So
Mhm.
public intox, disorderly conduct, um, trespassing for the most part, because a lot of times it's just people sleeping in buildings. So we're reducing the amount of people that are going to jail. So we're reducing essentially the tax burden for
Mhm.
paying for that jail, because as many people know, it's more expensive to live in jail than to actually help people on the street. So
Yeah.
really kind of saving money all around. And police department was like, yes, absolutely, we enjoy saving money.
Mhm.
So
Mhm. Oh, I'm
good
sure.
journey. Yeah.
Awesome. Okay. Um, so in regards to kind of like you were obviously saying like just about everything,
Mhm.
from what you've stated. When you are kind of in the field of more like law enforcement, legal system, do you notice there's stigma towards mental health in that field?
100%. Yeah.
Mhm.
Um, I mean, they, if you think about, what the media portrays as someone having a mental health diagnosis or someone in
Mhm.
crisis, um, or my big thing is like the media portrayal of schizophrenia, and
Mhm.
psychosis in
Mhm.
general. Um, you're seeing, as most people, especially not with a mental health background, will walk in the scene and be like, "Oh, this person's crazy," or like, if even if they have a legitimate law enforcement concern, or a crime's been committed against them, it's kind of like they're going in like, "Okay, sure, absolutely, yeah, no, you're hearing voices, and I'm sure someone actually broke into your house." Um,
Mhm.
so really, that idea of not being believed, um, really it extends very much to mental health. It is one of the reasons I turned into this position, was because I saw so many individuals with disabilities, cognitive, physical, behavioral disabilities, being assaulted and
Mhm.
no one believing them, or
Mhm.
the idea that, well, this person has schizophrenia or this person has autism and they're not competent to stand trial as their own, as a victim of a crime. So we're not even going to prosecute. Um, so being able to go out with the officers, and it sounds terrible, but like humanize people,
Yeah.
remind them that this could be anyone.
Mhm.
Anyone can develop most of these disorders at any time. Um, so having that empathy and that understanding and that compassion, um, has been able to, some officers, turn them around and, um, actually take them seriously.
Mhm.
Because there are a lot of people that, they'll just kind of write it off, and like they'll respond uh, to, a call of that they've deemed, someone with some sort of mental health diagnosis, and they'll kind of peruse, make sure everything's looks okay, but really at the end of the day, not take it seriously. Um,
Mhm.
which it really is a shame, because, people with disabilities are more likely to be victims of crime,
Yeah.
and to be taken advantage of. So if officers are going in with that stigma, and that
Mhm.
idea of what, schizophrenia or psychosis looks like, they're they're making it worse. It's
Mhm.
really not victim centered at that point.
And I will say you touched on this, and it was not even something like I guess I'd even thought about with your kind of intersection of the law and sexual violence and mental health. Because
Hmm.
first of all, you're telling me, oftentimes if you have a mental health diagnosis, it might not be taken seriously. we see that a lot with our sexual violence rape victims.
Mhm.
So to be someone who has a mental health diagnosis and also be a rape victim, I mean, that's even more of a reason to have an advocate like you on hand.
Mhm.
Just to be able to explain, like, no, they're not actually going crazy. They're having a trauma response right now.
Right. Right.
Mhm.
Right. And that
So,
I try to do a lot of training with the officers when they first come on. And then so there's a law that says, it's a nationwide law, and a certain percentage of the police officers on a police force, and it depends, per the size of the police force,
mhm,
but a certain percentage of each police force needs to be trained in crisis intervention,
mhm,
which basically is dealing with mental health. It's not nearly the, you know, not doesn't match nearly, graduate level work, or even bachelor's level work. They get, 40 hours of training once,
mhm,
and then they get a little refresher. But we're actually making a really concerted effort to have 100% of our police force trained in CIT, so that an officer can show up to the scene and at least be like, okay, I can kind of identify what's going on here. I
mhm,
know that I need to be responding with empathy, and, okay, this person might be sick, and just because they're sick doesn't mean they're not valid.
mhm.
And kind of teaching them to step out of that police, like,
Yeah.
immediate, like really a heightened trauma response. Um,
Mhm,
and rather go in, and I say to the officers all the time, it's not your job to believe them, it's your job to take a report. There's
mhm.
all these other people that have to deal with if they're telling the truth or not. You just write it on paper. um, so we're trying to get to that point of, regardless of what they're saying, just write it down,
Yeah,
and
of
we'll
course.
sort it out after.
Mhm,
And then really our job, so police officers, you just write it down. Our job, believe no matter what. um,
mhm.
and then, the prosecutor can figure it out if they're going to do something from there. We see it a lot with them, a lot with sex workers as well, because there is that huge intersection, um, of sex work and drug use. um,
Mhm, mhm.
the idea of, like, okay, you know they're shooting up, they went into a hotel room with someone who promised them dope, and now they're saying that they were raped. um, just having that compassion and understanding, like,
Mhm.
right, it can happen to anyone.
Yeah, yeah.
So if you're already in a higher risk category,
Mhm,
it's more
mhm.
likely to happen. So having that knowledge, being able to kind of acknowledge that lifestyle choices are not the cause or the reason or an excuse for any crime being committed against them.
Yeah. And we see that just from the advocacy standpoint. We are in Auburn
Mhm.
University. Lots
Right,
of college kids, lots of
right,
drinking. And oftentimes there have been people who've been afraid to come forward because they're like, well, if I was drinking, I put myself in that position.
right,
And
right,
same mentality, like you said, like that's not an excuse though. Like, yes, that was part of the situation, but that was not an excuse for them to do that. You can be, you know, doing whatever. That doesn't give someone a right to do that to you. So
yeah,
I think it's good, the humanizing thing, and taking away the blame, which is
yeah,
huge part of our work, and I'm sure yours too.
yeah, absolutely,
Mm-hmm.
absolutely.
So this is actually before I got clarification on like specifically what you did in Little Rock. I was looking up different like ways that social work is integrated into the police systems and like law enforcement. And I actually found that like in Oregon, they have an intervention team called Cahoots. I don't know if you've ever heard of them,
Yeah.
or if that was like what you built off of, kind of.
So in a completely random, separate part of my life, I was very involved with the BLM movement here. And from that, we started this coalition that was really looking at how to change the police response in the city, and ideas that we could bring forward to the police department and to the city board of directors. Like, we really want to do this. So we
Mm-hmm.
had actually, before this was even a thought, in my head, I had met with the people from Kahoot, and we spoke
Awesome.
about it. And we spoke about their transition into this team, and the concerns that they've been having, and kind of how to take that idea of a model and kind of reframe it. And Kahoots, for the most part, has been largely successful. They have had recently, and unfortunately, and it's kind of changed social work in police departments. They've had a couple instances where people have been shot and or injured while doing the work. So knowing that and keeping that in mind, we've been kind of tweaking what we want to do. So there's, in a town, Conway, that's probably 40 minutes north from here. They just started a program. Their city is like 10 people big. It's much, much smaller. And they have a co-response team. They have a behavioral health worker and an officer. And typically what they'll do is the officer will get out of the car first, kind of secure the scene, and then the behavioral health person will come out. So they also have bulletproof vests and stuff, which I do not have. But what we tend to do is, really depending on the situation, and depending on how well I know the person, as well as their previous history. If I know that, every time cops show up to this person's house, they have a gun or a machete in their hands, I'm probably not going to go alone. I'm probably going to make sure I have an officer with me. And, figuring out what's safest for me. So I always have, 911 on speed dial. I have a radio, getting a radio. But I won't go out to places without the officers. So we're we're using the Kahoot model and then kind of making it work for what we have at the moment. And it's not to jinx anything, but so far in a year and a half, we haven't had any instances of anything happening. I've never even felt slightly unsafe in any situation. And I've talked to some of my friends who work in like group home settings. I also, in my spare time, work inpatient in a psych unit. And like, we think about it, like, I never need a gun, like, to de-escalate someone in, a psych or a group home atmosphere. So my kind of point of view is like, okay, so why don't we just take those de-escalation techniques that we already know, and use them in this larger setting? And from that, I've never felt even slightly uncomfortable with any of my people. And there have been many of them who have been to jail multiple times for assault, and some of them assault on a police officer. And because we're social workers, never felt that, uncomfortable feeling,
Do you think that has a lot to do with like kind of like the intimidation that they feel with like seeing a police officer and like versus seeing 100%. You, for example?
Absolutely, yeah. And there have been times where officers have called me to a scene, and I'll walk up, and it kind of immediately de-escalates things. So I generally, I'm always ready to run. So I'm generally dressed in like jeans, like casual, because I also never know where I'm going. Really relaxed. As soon as if I'm meeting someone for the first time, I generally like pat my hips. I'm like, I'm not an officer. I don't have a gun. Never wanted to be a police officer. Still can't believe I work here. Like my badge that I have is just it's an ID card, and it's on a sea turtle lanyard. Very, very unassuming, not threatening at all. And I always have snacks. So really, just literally just me showing up and just having an honest conversation with them. It really just de-escalates it completely.
She answered my questions that I had in her little brief with Kahoot.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think they're answered.
Yeah.
Which is good. You got that information. So Mallory, what would you say are some, maybe you kind of talked a little bit about your role and what you do. What are some limitations that you feel like you have working with the police department?
Um, so one thing that we've talked about, and I actually, in writing and thinking about what I wanted the program to look like and the policies surrounding it, I looked at the social work code of ethics and the police department rules and regulations. For the most part, they're at complete odds with each other. So what I've been able to do is I have said, okay, I understand police department stuff, but code of ethics trumps my role as a police department employee. So, which is great because I will get more information from people than any officer, which is good and is bad sometimes. They, I have one client who every time I talk to them, he's drinking. And I know that if he stops drinking, he's going to go into really bad withdrawals and might die from it. So he's fine. I'll meet with him and he's drinking, that's fine. And then occasionally he'll pull out some weed. In any situation, an officer would be like, okay, I'm gonna have to take that. I don't want it. It's kind of finding that balance of like, I'm not going to arrest you, even if I wanted to. I'm not going to. I'm not going to call the officers. But like maybe that's put it away until I leave. So we do that a lot. There have been generally a lot of the limitations around drugs. I've had people who, I'll call either in jail or I'll be talking to them on the streets. And like if they're coming in my car, which is a city vehicle owned by the police department, before I get into a car with anyone, I say, do you have drugs on you right now? And sometimes they will say, yes, I do. And I will say, I cannot drive you. Get rid of it. But I am not putting you in my car right now. So like, and for the most part, I've never met a client who's not okay with that. They know that they can tell me anything. There have been some scenarios in which I have been told of crimes that are happening and that have happened. And, I always go back to supervision and be like, okay, what do I do? But, I think at the end of the day, we're doing what's best for the client. Obviously, if someone is murdered, I'm going to say something. But, we've had a couple years ago, we had someone who was stabbing people on the street at night. And a couple of people had died from him. And there was one victim who survived the attack. And she wasn't going to talk to police because police. So she was fine with talking to me. She knew that every time I came to see her, I would have a soda for her and some snacks and whatever she needed. And I would talk to her and I would get information from her. And we would always go back and forth, like what she would be comfortable with me sharing with the officers, and what she would not. So it's this weird position of like, I'm going to hold all this information. And I have to figure out at what point is this too much information.
Gotcha.
And at the same time, again, people feel more comfortable talking to me. A couple months ago, we had a homicide, and it was a teenage boy. And it's a weird scenario. There was a bunch of teens around. They were like hanging out in the parking lot, doing the Southern thing, hanging out at Walmart. And none of the kids felt comfortable talking because it was uncomfortable. And kids were drinking. They were smoking weed. They were out late at night. They didn't want their parents to find out. So after it happened, everyone left. And of course there were pictures on Snapchat and everything. But the officers are having such a hard time getting in touch with the kids because they didn't want to get in trouble with their parents. So we had set up a way to, the kids could anonymously text me the information that they knew or who they knew was who was involved, or things that they were seeing on Snapchat, and I was then able to pass that information to the homicide detectives without them getting in trouble with their parents, because that was a real concern for them.
Of course, yeah.
So I feel like it works.
I feel like we even see that like with that like trust aspect and like the victim advocacy side that we do, like they're so much more comfortable talking with us and like telling us what happened versus sitting down and police station and being like, this is what happened to me. I feel like that level of trust with like social workers is like such a big thing with our clients.
Right, right. Absolutely. Absolutely.
So,
and it's
Mallory,
so important.
Yes, no, I 100% agree with that. It's a privilege for us to be able to hold that information. So we want to go about it the right way. I'm curious, have you ever had a situation where you and officer disagreed about what to do?
Yes.
How do you
many times?
Yeah.
Yes. Oh gosh, so many times, really. There was a guy that some well-meaning woman called about and said this person is sick and needs some help. And he did not need help. He did not want help. He did not need anything. And officers called me to talk to him and kind of deal with the situation. I showed up. Guy's in a wheelchair. He's just having a hard time. And officers were like, well, he has a warrant out. We have to arrest him. Like, come on. He's not doing anything. He knows that he has a warrant. Like, he can handle it in his own time. Just let him do it. No, we got to take him to jail. Like, you can't, come on. Like, you can't do this. They ended up arresting him and taking him to jail, which then just really caused me more work because then I went to jail to talk to him. And then the next day I went to court to talk to the judge and the prosecutor and be like, can you just let the guy out? This well-meaning woman said, oh, this man clearly needs some help, and got the guy thrown in jail. Typically when we disagree, I try to work my way around it as much as possible and do what's right for the client. When I was working sexual assaults, it was the same thing. If I knew that there was enough information to make a case and you're not going to pursue it, I am going to tell you every single day, and I'm going to annoy you. And I'm going to tell you exactly what you need. And anytime that victim calls, I'm going to put them right to your voicemail because if you won't listen to me, you at least need to listen to the victim say why you need to prosecute. But it happens all the time.
And I feel like too, especially, we are coming from the viewpoint of being a rape crisis center, that kind of persistence usually has to come from our end as advocates. So I just know how much that would mean, I think, to us if Auburn were to have, a social worker and stuff also advocating on theirs. Because, we have lots of victims and, only a certain number of them choose to prosecute.
Right.
But we have to, we are working with a lot of different things at a lot of different times. So having someone else on our team would be lovely. And I'm glad that you were able to, and I'm sure probably still are able to help with victims, especially in those scenarios where those cases are super hard to make.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I've been with the police department now for over 3 years, and there are people that I worked with in my first month that, I'm still working with now. And, I'm still making sure, they're okay and they're healthy and everything. And that if they, pursued charges, that they're pursuing charges and it's going well. It I think that relationship just never stops between an advocate and a victim. It goes on forever. And I'm sure you guys feel the same. Like if someone contacts you years later and been like, hey, remember in 2020? And it's like, yes, I do remember. What's up? What's going on? So it's nice to be able to be there, especially as things go through prosecution, because, the justice system is not always just, and everyone has questions. And there's just not enough people to help them out and answer in a non-judgmental, caring way.
Definitely. No, I agree. And I am, so something we do see kind of often, and just as trauma workers in general, this is a common thing where sometimes when a victim or survivor has to go in and kind of give their statement or go through that process of the whole legal system, it can be really re-traumatizing to them.
Absolutely.
I'm curious, have you seen anything that helps with combating the re-traumatization, especially from a legal standpoint?
Yes. So we try to be there with them as much as possible. And we all have our work cell phones, and they all text us. And we try to maintain that communication, because it does suck sometimes at midnight when, things just get too bad. Or, you have you wake up in the middle of the night and you're like, oh my God, did he get arrested? Or like, was there a bond set or anything? And we're always there and answer and, help them out and make sure that they know exactly what's going on.
I was just going to add on to like you saying how like Auburn kind of like needs to, all of the counties that we serve, like implementing like a system like this, because when I was on hotline, when I was interning, I remember I got a call from like a police station because they had a survivor come in and, she wanted like answers on like what happened and everything. And he had called me. He was like, I don't really know how to like address the situation or how to talk about this properly. And I don't really feel like she wants to talk to me. And so I just feel like it's like a high demand to like have social workers and, police, like law enforcement in general, just like integrate together to be able to like have like, because not everyone knows 100% how to, I'm still learning how to address certain situations, how to talk about things. Because like some things are not always the most comfortable to talk about. But just like coming from, like Mallory said, like they're humans, everyone, humanizing situations, like having like people be, I think, more educated on like that it's okay to like have those uncomfortable like talks too, on top of like having social work and like law enforcement be like integrated together.
Yeah.
And I think,
sorry,
go ahead. Go ahead.
So I was just going to say so I do a lot of the rookie training, and we'll go out, and we'll do like run scenarios with them around domestic violence and sexual violence and everything in between. And one thing that I have found is necessary is literally having them say correct anatomical parts of the body. It's embarrassing, and they're all uncomfortable, and they laugh and they look at me like I'm absolutely out of my mind. But if someone comes in and says like, yes, he touched whatever, the officer is like, oh, okay, great. Okay, I'll, right. But you need to be comfortable. You need to, we're all adults here. Let that go. And, handle it. Like this, someone is trusting you to listen to them, and they're going to use whatever words they want to. And the last thing they want to see is like this, young, fresh-faced officer like start blushing when they say vagina. It's ridiculous. So that is one thing that I make sure all the officers do is like, you have to be comfortable with body parts. It's so simple, but like, yes, come on, let's get it through.
Yeah. Well, no matter what you're having to say, whatever they're telling you, the victim is telling you, is probably 20 times way more uncomfortable for them.
Oh, absolutely.
To say it. So,
absolutely.
just making that less challenging. I think and our other coworker Amanda kind of works really well with just making connections with police officers in our area. Like while we, don't have the social workers, they feel like for the most part are aware of our services. And one of the things that we really try to reiterate is we want to help. Like your job as a police officer, we want to take that burden off of you of dealing with the emotional stuff so that you can do your job. You can get those facts. They can tell you that story and we can kind of take care of the rest. So that's where like the viewpoint we kind of try to come at it, because we do appreciate our police officers. They do some, really heavy work that they see day in, day out. And we just want to be there with them as people who have, a little bit more human service background and human service experience to be able to help in whatever we can, just to reduce that burden and not have to have them take on basically the job of social worker and police officer, because you can't be both.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think you make a really good point. Like, so what I try to think about is, as social workers, we're taught to recognize like our burnout and our compassion fatigue. And that's not something that officers learn. They know, they know like, okay, you can go to therapy if you want. You're probably going to see a lot that you don't want to see. And at the end of the day, I think what sometimes can come off as callous and just not caring at all is really just the face of someone who's incredibly traumatized and has not processed that trauma. I have a bunch of interns and I was introducing one of my interns to a detective who works all the rape cases in Little Rock. And so we were talking to this detective. The detective and I realized we had, she had been a responding officer on a case that I had worked. And unfortunately, this victim had recently passed away. And she hadn't known yet. So I was telling her about that. And, she was talking about, what she remembered from the case and from the scene and, how deeply it impacted her. Because if you think about it, officers are going on however many calls a night. So to remember one, it really sticks. So she's talking about just how terrible it was. And my intern said, "Do you get therapy?" And she said, No, we don't get therapy. You just deal with it. And anytime that I just want to scream at an officer and say, be understanding, like be a kind person, I also have to think, okay, this person is traumatized just as much as the victim is. It's that secondary trauma, because at the end of the day, they see just so much. They see just the worst parts of life. And it's very much not what we see on SVU. It's terrible. So, thinking about, okay, this person is also traumatized and maybe they need some grace as well, and understanding, calms me down a little bit because I do want to scream at them sometimes. But I think that understanding and trying to work as much as possible with them, with the understanding that I have a traumatized victim here. I also have a traumatized officer. I need to manage both. And it is of course really difficult to explain that in the moment. Anyone. But I try to keep that in mind, when I'm talking to the officers. And like in my office, my intern's offsite. So this was the first time he was in my office, and he's like, "Oh, well, you have a lot of fidget toys." And I was like, "Yep, I do." And he's like, "Do you see clients in here?" I said, No, I don't. It's for the officers, and the officers, they come in and they grab a fidget toy from my little fidget toy basket. And I have a bowl of candy. So they come in and they grab a piece of candy and they have a fidget toy. And they just start talking to me and they don't realize it. but we're, we're having some
Yep.
sessions here, because they don't have that ability to talk to anyone. So I kind of view part of my job is really to sneak some psycho ed in there, and make sure that the officers also know that, you can talk to me as well. I'm not going to judge you. In fact, I would much rather prefer you come to me. So hopefully that one day, when they go out on the scene, they've worked through some of their trauma, and some of their compassion fatigue, so that they can look at a case and see, okay, this person really is traumatized and they really need help and they need assistance. And I am going to give them the respect and the validation that I would like, as an officer who's traumatized. Yeah, that's kind of how I try to view it. Everyone's traumatized. We just all need to be more trauma informed and take care of everyone.
Yeah. I love that perspective. I think that that's awesome. It sounds like, not only are you there for your victims and also, anyone you may see outside, but you're there for the police officers too, which is much more needed, I think, than maybe you would realize when you first hear police social worker.
Yeah. They will never admit that they need some help.
Right.
But they'll come to me, and I mean, it happens all the time. They'll come to me and they'll sit in my office and they'll be like, yeah, I need some referrals. I just worked a suicide. So I need some referrals for the family. And I'll be like, oh, I'm so sorry. Like, explain to me what happened. And they'll explain to me, and that's really tough for you to work that scene. It really was. This one really hit me. I'm like, oh, let's talk about this a little
like
bit
slowly going in.
Exactly. Just like doing some sneaky social work. Because we all need it.
Yes, definitely. Oh my goodness. Well, Mallory, I want to thank you for joining us. I feel like this has been super interesting to just hear about, what your job entails. And honestly, for me, it makes me excited about the future of the social work profession just in general, because I think we have a lot of awesome jobs ahead of us that we're still discovering. That because my thing is there's people there, you need a social worker.
Absolutely.
So I'm glad that it seems like, at least your police department and surrounding areas are working towards that, which is awesome. So every time we have a guest on, we ask them one final question. And that is, what is your message to survivors?
Oh, I think I would probably say thank you. So I've done sexual assault work for a very long time. And I think, not only is it so incredible that people trust us, to disclose to, but I think about all the people who have not found someone to trust yet. And, even if they haven't found that person yet, there are some people out here, who will believe them and who will love them unconditionally, regardless of what's going on. When we want to hear stories and we want to make it a safer place. I think is the goal for all people who care for survivors. I always think of sexual assault. It's like, this is the worst day of your life. So let's make it slightly better tomorrow. We're at rock bottom. Let's make as much as we can to try to get to that next day. And if tomorrow sucks, we'll try it again. Because at some point, it's going to be better than the worst day.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, again, I thank you for joining us. I thank everyone out there who's listening. Thank you, Madison, for coming on for this episode too.
Thank you for having me.
For any of our listeners out there, we will see you on the next episode. So yeah, that's all we have for you. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.